this is Paulists InFormation. I am novice Patrick Christ here with Joe Ciccone, who's currently working at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. So today, Joe, I wanted to talk a little bit about your vocation and how you got from where you were to where you are now. So tell me, what was it first like, or when did you first feel called?
Priesthood, for me, was not much on my radar screen as I was growing up. And I think it was around when I was 29 years old, it was like almost 2 years before going to the Paulist, that I began to get an inkling of, or a thought about priesthood or being of service in the church. I had been involved with the Catholic Charismatic Renewal. I was always connected to church. In my last year of high school, I went on a Crucio kind of awakening retreat. And so I had connections to the church, and I eventually met young people, peers, who were connected to the church. And that somehow all sifted through. But when I was a young man, I grew up in a Redemptorist parish. And I would always be asked, don't you think you ever want to be a priest? And I would say, no, please don't ask me that question. But God has His own plans, and so it was a while, and it took me 2 years of really discerning, I think, before I got serious to take the first step. It was a very frightening thing to do, but you have to be honest for yourself, or to your own self, I think, because I think God plants the idea in your heart, in your head, and then you have to kind of follow through on it.
So now you mentioned like Redemptorists, and then there's also diocesan priesthood, or the Franciscans, or all sorts of orders and ways you can get into religious life. What made you want to join the Paulists? How did you even find out about the Paulists?
Well, that's interesting. I'm from New York, where the Paulists were founded, at least in one of the boroughs of New York. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I never really heard about them. So I did make up in my mind that I wanted to be part of a religious community and not a diocesan priest. I can't fully explain that. I think it was part of the fraternal support, the camaraderie that I was really looking for. I didn't want to be kind of a lone ranger out there. So I started reading literature about different religious communities. And it was through a Dominican sister in Brooklyn, New York, who was at the parish that I had become involved with. When I finally had the courage to mention that I was seriously looking into priesthood, she said to me, you need to go to the Paulist Fathers because of what you do for a living. I was in advertising. I had gone to art school, and I worked on Madison Avenue for a large advertising firm. And she said, you need to check them out. And then I did. And I was very fascinated about what I read about the Paulist Fathers. I think what attracted me was their willingness to be in places where there were not a lot of Catholics, their sense of energy and creativity, and the willingness to meet people where they were at. But that took a while for me to learn after exploring and asking questions. But I did meet with a diocesan vocations director. I looked into the Society of the Atonement, the Graymore Friars in the Franciscan tradition, and another Franciscan group. But it's when I went on a retreat at Graymore, where the Atonements are, I was reading a book about their founder, Father Paul Watson, who was originally an Episcopal priest. Interesting kind of parallel, because our founder, the Paulist founder, was not originally Catholic as well. And in that book, Father Paul Watson's father, who was also an Episcopal priest, had gone to Union Theological Seminary in Manhattan with one of the founding priests of the Paulist Fathers, who had become Catholic. And he went to hear his classmate preach at St. Paul the Apostle in Manhattan, our mother church. And he said, he came back to his son, Paul, and said, what we need in the Episcopal Church is a preaching order like the Paulist Fathers.
Ooh.
And that was like the Holy Spirit setting off fireworks.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about how you were in advertising.
Yes.
Could you talk a little more about that, and maybe how did you see some of the skills or maybe the experience you gained from that transfer into the Paulists? What was that like?
I think it was the sense of creativity and the sense of the Paulists who I met when I came to visit the novitiate, when I met with some Paulists, when I came even here to Washington, D.C., to their theologate. I wanted to see who was in the seminary, who were these people. And I found men who were very much engaged with our American culture and wanted to bring the power of the gospel into that culture, or to elicit it from the culture if it was there latent in some way. That excited me. I just found it a kind of a very creative group. And as I learned about their charism, about preaching, preaching was a big thing for me. Because as I was growing up, I was very disenchanted with the preaching that I experienced. Even though the Redemptorists, where the Paulists have roots, were a preaching kind of group. But for some reason, they weren't connecting to where my life was at. So the preaching piece was big, and I learned more and more about the Paulists and their particular charism about preaching and communicating the power of Jesus and the church to people.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for everything you shared. As kind of a note of finality, what is one piece of advice you would offer those who might be discerning the priesthood or religious life, or anything in their vocation?
I believe the Holy Spirit works in every individual, which is very Paulist, right? But you have to get in touch with that. You have to find some kind of a place to reflect and to think and to pray, but you also need to listen. And, someone can say, oh, I think I should be a priest. Well, that's very nice, but that has to be confirmed by other people and by the church, ultimately. So you have to pay attention to what other people are saying, what they see in you. One of the weirdest experiences I had was when I knew I was going to move to the Paulist or to priesthood. I was leaving my job at the advertising agency. And I didn't want to tell people what I was doing. I wasn't ready to do that. But I went into a meeting. There were a bunch of gentlemen finishing with a meeting. And I said, I'm going to be leaving the ad agency in a couple of weeks. And one man who happened to be a very devout Catholic, and I didn't quite know that, said to me, where are you going? In other words, what other job are you taking? What other ad agency are you going to go to make more money? And I said, well, I'm really not. I said, I'm exploring some other options. He said to me, are you going to be a priest? I almost went through the floor. Talk about a confirmation. Somehow he recognized something in me. So I would say people need to pay attention to what other people are saying to you, but you have to go to your gut, because I think deep down inside, God is speaking to you. You just need to listen.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for everything, and thank you all for watching. This is Paulist InFormation here with Joe Ciccone, and like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube, and hopefully we'll see you later.